Sleep with history. A day in the life of a concubine. In feudal Japan and more, close your eyes and breathe in the weightless hush of anticipation. Imagine a world where silence speaks louder than words, where each breath is measured, each movement rehearsed, until even your sighs shimmer with intention. Picture a candlelit corridor, the air laced with sandalwood and secrets, where soft footsteps echo through lacquered floors like whispers from centuries past. You are not merely stepping into a room, you are slipping into a role woven for you long before you were old enough to understand the power of presence. Tonight, we trace the life of a woman sculpted by tradition, draped in silk and discipline, trained to wield influence not through force but through stillness, grace, and a choreography of glances that could change the course of power. In this quiet realm of lacquered walls and painted screens where honor binds tighter than rope and shame lingers like perfume, she exists not as herself, but as a mirror to the desires of others. Her training began with the art of stillness, how to walk without sound, how to smile without revealing thought, how to endure without complaint. Every tilt of the head, every flick of the wrist had meaning, and behind each gesture was a lineage of women whose bodies were calligraphy and whose emotions were footnotes erased in powdered layers. The dawn here does not rise in blaze, but in hush, its arrival more suggestion than command, filtered through the paper-paneled world of private chambers. There are no birds heralding the day, no declarations, only light, patient and pale, casting your silhouette against walls that know your secrets better than you do. You awaken not because you are rested, but because it is time, because to linger would risk unraveling the delicate illusion of perfection. The futon has etched itself into your limbs, your dream haunts you with slippery symbolism, and your spine aches with the burden of posture. Yet none of it shows. You rise like mist, like myth, like someone watched even when alone. The attendants come, wordless and precise, as if afraid their breath might crack the porcelain mask you've become. They wash you not to soothe, but to restore the icon they've been tasked to maintain. Hands familiar with routine move through the rituals. Warm water, fragrant oils, hairpins sharp as intent. Your face is prepared not to reflect emotion, but to deflect it. The bronze mirror offers no comfort, only confirmation. You look like someone who might think too much and speak too little. Perfect. Laughter murmurs from beyond the shoji screen. It belongs to the man who holds your fate in his fleeting whims, and it curls in your ear like smoke, impossible to grasp, yet heavy with meaning. You prepare accordingly, recalibrating your entire being into something pleasing, unreadable, exquisite. You know better than to compete or complain, only to embody. Silk whispers across your skin as you are dressed layer by layer into invisibility. A final breath scented with plum and patience seals the transformation. And as you brace for another day lived in quiet performance, your body remembers the mantra etched into every woman who's ever had to smile before she felt it. Here we go again. One shat. The ritual of disappearance. Breathe slowly, as though your lungs remember a time when you belonged only to yourself. Let the stillness wrap around you like early morning mist curling along a lacquered veranda. You are not awake. You are emerging, and this is no ordinary morning. This is the unspoken ceremony of erasure, the delicate vanishing of self beneath centuries of expectation. Before you can become who you must be, you must first unbecome. The mirror watches as you sit perfectly still, spine elongated in a pose that suggests serenity and discipline, but in truth is mostly stubborn muscle memory. Your attendant approaches with the tools of transformation, silent, swift, and entirely without pity. The first step is the whitening, not merely cosmetic but symbolic, an obliteration of warmth, of earthiness, of anything remotely human. Crushed rice, and in more regrettable recipes, powdered lead, is pressed onto your skin in layer after chalky layer until your complexion mimics porcelain left too long in moonlight. Your natural color, whatever it was, is now a memory, replaced by a mask so pale it could haunt a corridor. The powder reaches not just your face, but your neck and collarbones, sweeping away every trace of life until you resemble something not born, but painted. You resist the urge to sneeze as the puff circles your nostrils, because even a single breath could disrupt the illusion. Your eyebrows, formerly functional facial features, are now obstacles. They're blotted out and redrawn higher, arched into a state of perpetual surprise, because appearing impassive yet slightly startled is, apparently, the height of allure. Your lips are not spared, but they're not celebrated either. A small red blot is applied at the center, as if your mouth once whispered a secret and froze mid-sentence. The effect is meant to be demure. The result is slightly haunted. Still, you nod. Approval is not a feeling here, it's a survival instinct. Then comes the part you do not speak of, even though everyone knows. The teeth. Blackened, one by one, with a paste that smells like regret and old iron. The meaning has shifted over the years. Purity, commitment, unavailability. But the sensation never does. Cold, sticky, and strange, it stains your smile into a warning. You are now unrecognizable from the woman who rose from the futon. You've become an artwork from a world where emotions are not worn, but buried. Yet you are not finished. Now begins the dressing, which is not so much an act as it is a test of endurance. First, the cotton underlayers, humble barriers between your body and the silks to come. They pretend to offer comfort, but are mostly there to absorb the sweat of pretending. Then, one by one, the inner robes, soft, symbolic, and maddeningly specific in order. Their colors speak in dialects of status. Red over green murmurs elegance, while white over gold says, you don't have time for nonsense. The outer kimono is less subtle. It weighs as much as expectation and shines like withheld affection. Sleeves trail like shadows, long enough to hide envy or strangle restraint, and everyone knows to give you space when you walk now. But the true torment waits in the obi, the sash that does not wrap so much as constrict. It is pulled tight, not to flatter, but to bind. The pressure beneath your ribs is a constant reminder. You are here to be seen, not to breathe. Each tug and fold is executed by attendants who no longer speak, only grunt in a language of friction and fabric. You have learned the code. A grunt means stand straighter. A sigh means your arm is ruining the symmetry. When they are done, you cannot feel your waist, but you look magnificent. Not comfortable, not mobile, but magnificent. Like a scroll come to life, inked with restraint and wearing enough fabric to host a modest tea ceremony inside your sleeves. There are no plans for today, no summons from the daimyo, no rivalries requiring sabotage. You may sit in the garden, appearing to read, pretending not to notice the shadows shifting behind the bamboo. But still, you must look ready for a visit, a portrait, a moment that may never arrive. The performance is continuous, the audience unseen, and the costume eternal. You are dressed, powdered, and silenced. You are ready to disappear into beauty once again. 2. The silent ceremony of sustenance. Allow yourself to drift into stillness, where even hunger must obey the laws of elegance. Imagine nourishment not as a pleasure, but as a performance, a ritual calibrated to preserve mystery, not satisfaction. Morning light filters through the rice paper screens, golden and indifferent, as you are guided into your next posture of the day, seated, poised, folded delicately atop a cushion that does nothing to soften the silent suffering of your knees. You are not here to relax. You are here to embody restraint in its most graceful form. Before you, a lacquered tray is placed like an offering to a porcelain deity. A modest bowl of rice, so pristine it could be symbolic. A sliver of grilled fish, seasoned more with precision than flavor. 3 pickled vegetables arranged in a composition of quiet judgment, and a bowl of miso soup so reserved it almost apologizes for existing. The meal is not meant to nourish. It is meant to maintain the illusion that you are ethereal, untouched by the earthly need for fullness. Your movements must echo that illusion. Chopsticks are handled like delicate instruments of diplomacy. You eat slowly, silently, chewing with the kind of restraint that suggests you're afraid to disturb the air. Enthusiasm is unbecoming. Appetite is almost scandalous. Should your expression shift from neutral to satisfied, it would be noted. Should your hand reach for an extra bite, it would be remembered. Each mouthful is a negotiation between survival and aesthetic. Meanwhile, your sleeves, monuments of excess, threaten the entire operation. You've developed evasive maneuvers, subtle folds, discreet tucks, imperceptible shifts in angle, all designed to protect the integrity of your meal and your dignity. A wrong move and fermented tofu could become a scandal. Behind you, attendants hover in cultivated silence, their glances feather-light but forensic. They won't interrupt, but they will recall. A dropped grain, a hurried sip, a sigh too deep. Each is a story for later, softly recounted when fans flutter and conversations dance in coded tones. You finish as you began, with grace. A gentle bow, the careful placement of your chopsticks, and an expression carved from serenity. Are you full? Of course not. Are you weakened? Possibly. But more importantly, do you look like someone whose only sustenance is moonlight and poetry? Absolutely. Breakfast is done, the tray is removed. You remain lighter not just in body, but in presence, ready to slip into the long, slow drift of your day, where the next task, like everything in this life, is not action, but waiting. 3. The art of invisible power. Sink gently into the stillness that follows performance. The kind of stillness that hums beneath silence, composed and tense, like a bowstring held at rest. You are no longer dressing, no longer eating, no longer becoming. You are now enduring, and this is perhaps the most crucial skill of all. The morning has carved you into an ideal, but the afternoon demands something more elusive. To master the art of waiting, not passively but with precision, as though time itself is bending around your stillness. This isn't idle waiting, nor is it a pause. It's a deliberate act, a performance where you must appear exquisitely available and entirely unattached, perfectly framed by the architecture of quiet desire. You are placed in your assigned space, a chamber of curated serenity. Tatami mats precisely aligned, a painted screen depicting cranes mid-flight, a bonsai that has been pruned into philosophical elegance, and a koi pond glinting just beyond the veranda, its surface undisturbed as your expression must be. You do not wander, for freedom is a luxury you were never promised. Instead, you remain poised in a kind of decorative stillness, legs folded beneath you, in a position both elegant and excruciating. You shift only to preserve the illusion of composure, never to ease the ache coiling in your limbs. You wait, not like someone forgotten, but like someone whose value grows with delay. Perhaps the daimyo will summon you in minutes, or perhaps not until the moon shifts above the tiled rooftops. He may be elsewhere, entangled with another woman's poem, or napping amidst silk and sandalwood. But such details are not yours to know. You might write a verse to pass the time, not to express, but to obscure, draping sorrow in metaphors of plum blossoms and fleeting clouds, the kind of sorrow that earns admiration rather than pity. Or perhaps you pluck the shamisen gently, its notes restrained, never jubilant. Too much joy suggests arrogance. Across the room or just beyond the shoji, the others are waiting too, their presence as subtle and charged as yours. It's a quiet battlefield. Who holds the stillest posture, who adjusts her collar with effortless flair, who glances at the koi pond with the most poetic detachment. Each motion is a statement, every stillness an argument. Your obi is tied slightly off-center, just so. A studied asymmetry that implies both mystery and taste. Eyes flicker, conversations bloom like perfumed traps. Compliments arrive cloaked in elegance and edged with intention. Your scent today is daring, which translates to, you smell like desperation, or Lady Hannah's new robe is so expressive, which is court speak for, she looks like an expensive curtain having an identity crisis. You smile at these with practiced grace, offering shallow bows and softer eyes, and behind each polite nod is a calculation. This is not mere gossip. It is a form of tactical engagement where reputation is shaped not by facts, but by the angle of a remark. Then, without warning, the air shifts. Someone mentions the daimyo, a glimpse near the pond, a fan left behind and perhaps noticed. The room stills, not in fear but in performance. No one reacts overtly, but tension curls through silks and sleeves like smoke. This is when your posture sharpens without changing, when your gaze drifts just far enough to appear disinterested but not distant, when you breathe like someone who doesn't need to be chosen, but is ready to be. You become a vision, desirable, unattached, gently radiant. The others do the same. It is a quiet war. No raised voices, no drawn swords, only the glint of earrings and sidelong glances. And if today you manage to make one rival question her scent choice, her hairstyle, the poetic merit of her haiku, you've won more than attention. You've climbed, silently, within the ranks of invisible power. You have not been summoned, not yet, but you remain in position, composed, unreadable, a vision in 12 layers of silk with ambition, breathing gently beneath the plum blossom perfume. Pour, the discipline of desire. Slip beneath the surface of the day's golden hush into a realm where gestures mean more than words and silence sings louder than desire. Let yourself sink into this world with the calm intensity of incense smoke curling through a sunlit corridor. Slow, intentional, and steeped in centuries of expectation. Here, beauty is not merely seen, it is curated, sharpened, and endlessly rehearsed. And now, after the powder, the poetry, the veiled glances, and floral warfare, the hour has come for one of the most deceptively tender rituals in the concubine's arsenal, the bath. It isn't required, not by law or decree, but its importance echoes in every whispered warning not to carry the scent of anxiety and pickled radish into the Daimos chambers. The bath is your reawakening, a soft reset in a day made entirely of performance. The air in the bathhouse clings warm and fragrant to your skin, steam rising in clouds laced with yuzu peel, and the heavy, invisible pressure of possibility. Your attendant begins to undress you, not with urgency, but with practiced reverence. The kimono's layers, once armor and artifice, are undone slowly, each knot and sash a sigh unraveling. Alone, you would never escape them. Each tie speaks of discipline and of restrictions too deeply embedded to question. But once freed, once bare beneath the steam, you are no longer the symbol, the role, the poised mystery. You are simply a woman in warm water wondering whether she shaved evenly enough to impress a man who may never notice. And yet you do not scrub too harshly. Desperation has its own scent, and it clings. Cleanliness must whisper, never shout. You are scented lightly, yuzu again, restraint bottled and dabbed behind your ears and wrists. Your hair is recoiled, your heels checked for imperfections, your body transformed not into something new, but into something slightly more perfect than it was before. And all of this might be for nothing. You may return to your quarters, redress yourself in silence, and wait once more, untouched and unread. Or you may be summoned. When it happens, it will not be loud. No fanfare, no scroll, just a gentle knock, a bowed messenger, and the most loaded phrase in the concubine's vocabulary. His lordship requests your presence. You are chosen. Or more accurately, you are required. And now you have 20 minutes to become unforgettable. Your attendants move swiftly but silently. Fresh powder masks the fatigue and pressure swelling beneath your skin. A little rouge on the cheeks. Not joy, just life. You change into your finer robe, the one with the golden cranes stitched in mid-flight across dusk blue silk. It says everything you cannot say aloud. Your hair is perfect already, but perfection here is not enough. It must be rechecked, repinned, refined. A final dab of citrus oil, a single breath drawn deep, and you begin the slow, echoing walk down the polished corridor. The distance is not long, but it stretches like ceremony. Each step must suggest grace, not eagerness. You are not hurrying. You are floating. You arrive, bow deeply, exquisitely. You are art now, and art does not sweat, falter, or ask questions. Whether he greets you or not is irrelevant. Your performance has begun. You are a favorite, a footnote, a fascination for the evening. This is not about love. This is about presence. And the ritual begins not in bed, but across a lacquered table with warm sake and careful compliments. He pours your drink, and in doing so gives you permission to become interesting. You sip slowly, as though you've never tasted obligation. Words are exchanged, poetry, fragments of dreams, a tale of a hawk he once saw circling like fate. You nod, not because it's new, but because your attention must always feel like a gift. His hand moves closer. He may praise your scent. He may compare you to snow or moonlight or something equally ephemeral. You react with soft gratitude, a smile dipped in suggestion. You are not seducing. You are merely allowing yourself to be discovered again. There may be music, but not from you. You are too busy holding the atmosphere like spun glass. The first touch comes, subtle, scripted, a brush of the hand, a sigh of silk. Then the space shifts, the lights dim, the screen closes, the roles deepen. You rise, every muscle choreographed, and follow him. This is not simply intimacy, it is ceremony, a wordless duet, where every movement must feel spontaneous but never uncontrolled. You kneel, you bow, you smile, you do not stumble, you do not wince. What you feel is irrelevant. What you convey is everything. Touch begins again, this time not polite, but exploratory. You respond just enough. You follow his lead, but never too quickly. Mystery is the language here. You are delicate, devoted, and dazzling in your restraint. And when it ends, if you can call it an ending, you lie beside him, your body cooling against the fading heat of performance. He may say something. He may already be asleep. You nod either way. Now comes the second ritual, analysis. Was your timing right? Your posture? Did your expression read satisfied, not self-conscious? These questions will never be voiced, but will follow you like shadows through the next day. Eventually, you rise. Not too soon, not too late. You redress, retie, recalibrate. The robe is restored. The hair is smoothed. You are once again the image of effortless allure. And as you slip through the corridors back to your own room, past unseen watchers and imagined whispers, you walk with the composure of someone who has just completed a delicate, dangerous art. Because that's exactly what this was. Not romance, not surrender, performance, poise, power veiled in softness, the scent of yuzu and quiet victory trailing behind your every step. 5. The currency of being chosen. Let yourself sink into the hush that follows the curtain call, the moment when the world stops watching and you finally begin to feel the weight of the role you just played. You return to your quarters under the soft hush of midnight's breath, and someone, dutiful and invisible, has already lit the lamp. The glow is gentle, the tea is warm, and you drink it without tasting. Your senses dulled not from fatigue, but from the intensity of holding yourself perfectly together for so many hours. You sit down, the silk of your robe folding quietly beneath you, and only then do you exhale. Not just air, but the quiet ache of being seen, held, desired, and now dismissed without a single word of permanence. You don't know what tonight meant. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Perhaps he will remember the way you tilted your head or the scent of your skin. Or perhaps by tomorrow you'll dissolve in his memory like incense, smoke fading into a painted ceiling. It doesn't matter. What matters is this: you were chosen. And in a world where affection is a public currency and presence is the most fragile form of power, that brief selection is worth more than sleep. Morning finds you early, not because the night gave you rest, but because concubines do not wake when they please. That's a luxury for wives, noblemen, or mythical beings with no rivals to outmaneuver. The futon feels narrower than it did last night, or perhaps you're simply more aware now of how small your place is in the palace's order, seen, adorned, and ultimately replaceable. Your attendants arrive just as the light begins to shift through the paper screens, their eyes averted with a politeness too polished to be sincere. They don't ask where you were. They don't need to. The scent of last night's incense clings faintly to your hair, and the once perfect cloud of styled strands now swirls in slightly uneven waves that whisper more than you ever will. The morning ritual begins again. Wash, powder, smooth, fold. A reconstruction of the persona you must wear, nearly identical to yesterday's, but with a touch more quiet exhaustion behind the eyes. No one speaks of the daimo, of what he said or didn't, of how his warmth faded before you even rose from the futon. One attendant clears her throat, almost imperceptibly. Another mentions, so casually it feels rehearsed, that Lady Ko received a silk comb imported from the south this morning. You nod. The game is back on. There's no postscript to your night, no emotional debrief. You don't tell anyone that the Deimos breath carried the faint sweetness of plum wine, or that he muttered a half-formed metaphor before sleep took him entirely. You certainly don't admit that now, in the morning light. You are second-guessing every pause in conversation and every glance held a moment too long. That would be indulgent. That would be foolish. That would be honest. Instead, you sit quietly in your chamber, posture perfect, expression composed, preparing for another day of performative peace. Floral arrangements, calligraphy critiques, shamisen scales. You write half a poem and leave it unfinished, not for lack of inspiration, but because ambiguity is safer. You watch a crane gliding just beyond the balcony, wondering how it feels to move without ornament, to exist without strategy, to leave without needing permission. But you do not move, because by now, the whispers have begun. They all know. They are recalculating, your rivals, your allies, even yourself. You are no longer simply a concubine. You are the woman who was summoned, and that changes everything and nothing. Today, you may not be the favorite, but you are still in play. And in this house of secrets and silk, survival is stitched into the art of stillness. Con 6. The echo of vanishing favor. Let the morning drift in slowly, like steam through latticework, gentle and weightless until it settles across your skin like the memory of something you can't name. The sun hasn't fully risen, and already the palace hums with invisible threads. Words unsaid, but fully understood. Gazes exchanged like currency. The scent of tension tucked between the camellias. You don't need to hear your name to know it's being spoken. You feel it in the shift of footsteps behind you, in the sudden stillness when you enter a room, in the lingering glances not meant to meet yours. The air is filled with the delicate sting of gossip, disguised as admiration, folded into compliments so artful they might be mistaken for blessings. Someone remarks, just loudly enough, that Lady So-and-so seems especially radiant today, which translates as, she's glowing because she was chosen, and the rest of us are pretending not to notice. Another muses aloud whether his lordship has grown fond of livelier company, meaning, of course, that subtlety apparently no longer pays. These words float through tea rooms and courtyards like perfumed arrows. They strike softly, but they land deep. No one accuses you directly, and that is the brilliance of it. Here, cruelty wears silk and speaks in metaphor. So your answer is stillness. You say nothing, offer only a soft smile, the kind that curls just at the edges, the kind that implies you know something no one else dares to ask. To react would be to confirm. To retreat would be to surrender. Instead, you step sideways into shadow. You take longer walks, choose quieter corners. You practice your calligraphy with such solemn grace that whispers begin to shift. Is she retreating or plotting? Enlightened or excluded? Either is useful. Let them wonder. In this place, invisibility isn't exile. It's armor. The ones who burn brightly attract too much heat. You, meanwhile, master the art of being just out of reach. When backhanded compliments arrive, "Oh, your robe is so elaborate today," you answer with kindness, so pointed, it leaves them unsure whether they've been thanked or scolded. You bow, you smile, and you leave before the conversation turns lethal. The shift begins slowly, fewer glances, fewer messages. One morning, the incense is wrong. Another, your tea arrives lukewarm. These are not mistakes. They are signals, delivered gently. A recalibration. You are no longer the whisper in the daimos ear. Someone else is. Perhaps she's new. Perhaps she's old, newly reinvented. It doesn't matter. The fan of favor has turned. You feel it. And yet, you do not falter. You nod more slowly, hold your smile a beat longer. You compliment the embroidery on Lady Haina's sleeves, even as you count the seconds before her confidence tips into overreach. Because this is the test not every woman passes. Not being chosen, but being unchosen without unraveling. You were once the center of the room. Now, you are the frame, still visible, still lovely, but peripheral. And that, too, is a role. You play it with precision. You still attend tea. You still kneel at the right angle. You still write your poems. And when someone watches your hand tremble ever so slightly as you lift your cup, you let them believe it's the weight of porcelain, not the ache of relevance slipping through your fingers. Because the truth is this: power here isn't about being seen. It's about being remembered even after the daimo forgets your name. 7. The quiet rebellion of stillness. Let the veil fall gently between past and present, like silk slipping through your fingers, silent, slow, familiar. Not everything must begin with thunder. Some truths arrive quietly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding. And here it is. You care. Of course you do. Not just for the man who summoned you, not even for the brief flicker of his interest, but for the power that shimmered just beneath it, for the validation, the attention, the feeling of being the axis around which a carefully controlled world turned. To be chosen was just intimacy. It was significance. It was proof. And now that certainty has shifted. You're no longer the sun in someone's sky. You've become a star among many, faint, still glowing, but no longer where the courtiers point their poetry. Still, you remain. Composed, present, dressed in grace, not desperation. Because in this palace, everything changes. Favorites, fortunes, even the way a glance lands across a garden path. It only takes a careless phrase, an ill-timed metaphor, a cracked hairpin mistaken for symbolism, and everything can turn. You've seen it. And that's why you wait, not with bitterness, but with precision. If favor can fade, it can also return. When it does, you'll be ready. Beneath the silence, you sharpen. And as seasons slide past painted doors, something else begins to change. Not the palace, not the daimo, not the ritual, but you. Slowly, almost without notice, the layers begin to peel. The powder washes off one evening and doesn't return quite the same. The performance falters, not from weakness, but from truth. One day, in a rare moment of solitude, you meet your own eyes in a bronze mirror, and the woman staring back isn't just a reflection of roles. She is real. Beneath the lacquered layers of etiquette, jealousy, whispered critiques and poems that pretended not to be personal, there is a spine, stronger than the silk that binds it, and a mind that remembers. The first time you were summoned, the first time you were praised, the first time your name was not spoken. You've played every part: muse, rival, ghost, survivor. You've smiled while fading and bowed through betrayal. You've written poetry with a bleeding heart and walked away from attention with your chin high. What remains is more powerful than affection. It is endurance. And that, in a palace built on staying desirable, is its own quiet rebellion. You are older now, and that too is a secret power. You no longer race to check your reflection when a messenger appears. You no longer adjust your hair for the perfect silhouette under lantern light. Some mornings, You skip the full powder ritual. You wrap yourself in silk not as costume, but as comfort. And you sit by the koi pond, not waiting, not pretending, just existing, watching the fish drift beneath the water's surface with more honesty than the court has ever allowed. You are still here, still composed, still watching, but now you belong to yourself. And in a world that trains women to be wanted, nothing is more dangerous or more beautiful than a woman who has learned how to endure. 8. The silent power, poison, passion, and the sacred shadows of the ancient world. Step gently now into the haze of incense and memory, into a world where the veil between body and spirit was not just thin, it was purposefully torn. Before the age of restraint and reform, before guilt was stitched into skin and desire buried beneath doctrines, there lived cultures that honored the sacred through the sensual, where the act of union was not indulgence, but invocation. Close your eyes and feel the warmth of stone temples under your feet. Hear the soft chant of prayers rising like breath from the earth, and enter the heart of an ancient truth. That human passion, at its purest, was once seen as divine expression. In ancient Babylon, the sacred and the erotic didn't compete, they danced. At the towering temples of Ishtar, goddess of love, war, and fertility, sexuality was a ritual bridge to the divine. Unlike later systems that cloaked intimacy in shame, the Babylonians revered it as cosmic alignment. Herodotus, equal parts historian and intrigued outsider, claimed that every Babylonian woman, at least once in her life, was called to the temple to partake in sacred sex, a ritual act meant not to degrade, but to sanctify. Cloaked in perfume and prayer, women awaited the silver coin that would mark divine transaction, not with judgment, but reverence. These women weren't mere instruments. They were vessels, priestesses, nobles, embodiments of sacred ecstasy. Their service ensured the flow of rivers, the blooming of fields, the beating of the world's heart. It was not sin, it was sacred ecology, though even then, power was not immune to change. Later, rulers distanced themselves from these rites, but the echoes remain. An altar built not of stone, but of body, and the ancient whispers of silk and skin offered to the stars. In Greece, where reason was a crown and myth a mirror, the line between divinity and desire took on theatrical flair. At the center stood Dionysus, god of wine, madness, and transcendence. His follower didn't kneel in silence. They danced through forests under moonlight, cloaked in skins and shadows. The Dionysian mysteries, private rites veiled in secrecy and song, offered more than revelry. They promised transformation, to shed the self through music, to dissolve into ritual ecstasy, to become not merchant, not wife, not slave, but raw spirit, untethered. These ceremonies weren't indulgences. They were emotional truths unwrapped through rhythm and risk. While philosophers like Plato looked on with wary eyes, the people knew the power of controlled chaos, that for rebirth to come, structure must first collapse. And so they danced, sang, touched, and in doing so, reached for gods not with prayers, but with presence. In Egypt, where the Nile wrote poetry in silt and every cycle echoed eternity, fertility was not metaphor, it was mandate. Gods like Min, boldly virile, and Hathor, goddess of music and joy, stood as reminders that the body's pleasures were part of nature's sacred order. During the festival of Min, the pharaoh himself played the role of divine consort, cutting the first grain, surrounded by rhythmic drumming, chants, and dances that celebrated not just abundance, but embodiment. Hathor Festival of Drunkenness, noisy, wild, and ecstatic, recounted the myth of joy restoring balance. These acts weren't shameful, they were harmonizing. Even healing rituals incorporated sacred sensuality. In temples, touch and suggestion became medicine, overseen by spiritual intermediaries. To know pleasure was to align with divinity, and to honor the body was to celebrate the earth's own heartbeat. Across the Mediterranean, in the marble shadows of Rome, passion wore a public mask. At Lupercalia, wild youths dressed in goatskins, or nothing at all, ran through the streets, striking women with leather strips to bless fertility and ease childbirth. The origins were mythic: a wolf's cave, twin founders, raw survival. The result was celebratory chaos with sacred intent. It was loud, earthy, unapologetic. The city paused to cleanse itself of winter's weight, to welcome spring not with purity, but with primal laughter. Even when Christian morality came to tame it, traces remained, perhaps even in the red hearts of Valentine's Day, because Rome knew, as all ancient cities did, that desire was not the opposite of holiness, but its mirror, its twin, its shadow. And then there was Eleusis. If Dionysus offered wild ecstasy, Eleusis offered solemn transformation. For over a millennium, the Eleusinian mysteries drew pilgrims to its sacred sanctuary near Athens, all sworn to silence, all united by the myth of Demeter and Persephone. The story, abduction, descent, reunion, was a metaphor for death, rebirth, and possibly even erotic awakening. Within the secretive telesterion, initiates fasted, drank the enigmatic kykeon, and bore witness to something unspeakable. Some scholars speculate a symbolic union took place, a reenactment of cosmic fertility. What's certain is the effect. Initiates emerged changed, shaken, renewed. These rites weren't spectacle, they were thresholds. Not everyone understood them, and that was the point. They were not for the curious, they were for the courageous. And through their silence, they preserved something sacred, the belief that in surrendering control, one might glimpse eternal truth. Now turn your gaze eastward, where in ancient India, the sacred and the sensual were not just entwined, they were identical. Here, in texts like the Kama Sutra, intimacy was elevated to an art, a discipline, a path to spiritual awakening. Sexual union wasn't dirty, it was divine dance. Temples adorned with carvings of lovers in motion didn't scandalize, they instructed. Pleasure was part of Dharma, the cosmic law. In Tantra, particularly, the union of male and female energies mirrored the union of self and the universe. Every touch, every breath was a mantra. Here, the body was not something to transcend, but a map to the soul. And through reverent touch, through shared breath and mindful movement, the divine was not worshipped from afar, but experienced within. This one about indulgence. It was about integration. Unlike other systems that saw the sensual as a threat, ancient Indian spiritual practice taught that by embracing it consciously, without clinging or shame, one could transcend the illusion of separation entirely. Across centuries and continents, these civilizations remind us that sexuality was once more than instinct. It was invocation. Ritualized, revered, encoded in temples and whispered in groves, it served not only to pleasure, but to purify, not to divide, but to connect. And while time buried many of these traditions beneath the weight of reform and repression, their truths pulse on, in carvings, in myths, In quiet moments when we remember that the body is not separate from the sacred, but its most intimate expression. Let yourself drift slowly now, not with haste, but with a hush, into the spaces ancient hands once carved from stone and silence. Imagine a time when temples were not merely places of prayer, but chambers of transformation, where the body, flesh, breath, pulse, was not considered profane but holy, the very instrument through which one reached the divine. We begin in the sacred twilight of Tantra, not a single dogma, but a vast river of spiritual practice that meandered through Hinduism and Buddhism alike, evolving in folds and ripples across centuries. Tantra taught that to find the divine, one must not escape the body, but enter it completely. In this intricate path, breath was a chant, touch a prayer, and intimacy a ceremony. Within the sacred rites of tantric sex, partners moved with intention so precise it mirrored myth. The man as Shiva, unmoving consciousness; the woman as Shakti, pulsing creation. Their union was not indulgence, but metaphor made flesh, a reenactment of the cosmos. But contrary to modern assumptions, sex was only one thread in Tantra's vast tapestry. Most paths were meditative, aesthetic, requiring inner heat, not carnal flame. Yet when sacred union did occur, it was not performance, it was revelation. In carvings at Khajuraho and Konark, lovers locked in sacred embrace are not decoration, but declaration. Here, the divine is reached not through denial, but through devotion to sensation made holy. Before Tantra rose in India, in the marsh-fed splendor of Sumer, a similar understanding pulsed through temple walls. In the city of Uruk, the goddess Inanna, later Ishtar, reigned not only over war and stars, but over passion, fertility, and sacred embodiment. Her priestesses, the Hierodules, were not marginal, they were revered. Trained in music, poetry, ritual, and love, they were the divine's representatives on earth. One of the most profound ceremonies was the sacred marriage rite, where the high priestess, embodying Inanna, united with the king in symbolic union to renew the land, the people, and the very rhythm of time. These rites, steeped in incense and incantation, were not spectacle, but sacrament. Over time, later empires would brand them as profane, but in Sumer, the body was not weakness. It was the riverbed through which the divine flowed. In forested Europe, far from stone ziggurats and sun-baked temples, the Celts found the sacred in soil and sky. Their Beltane festival, celebrated on the eve of May, was fire and freedom made ritual. It marked the threshold between spring and summer, a liminal moment when the veil between worlds thinned. Fires burned on hills, couples leapt through flame and smoke for blessing and purification, and in the woods, greenwood marriages unfolded, ephemeral unions that echoed the fertile pulse of the earth itself. There were no cathedrals here. Nature was temple, desire its offering. In these acts, sex was not shameful. It was seasonal, spiritual, cyclical. To join with another under starlight was to mirror the sacred union of earth and sky. Some children born of these nights were called children of the fire, believed to be touched by nature's own vitality. Though later buried beneath Christian suspicion, the whispers of Beltane survive, in ribbons, in dance, in the heat of bonfires, not quite forgotten. With Christianity came a new order, one where pleasure was no longer praised but policed. The body, once celebrated, became suspect. Yet even in the early church's fragile roots, glimmers of the old truths remained. Among fringe sects like the Gnostics and Carpocratians, union of opposites, male and female, matter and spirit, was seen as key to enlightenment. To know desire fully and without shame was to glimpse divine unity. But orthodoxy crushed deviation. Texts were burned, names erased. The temple priestess became sinner, the sensual mystic, heretic. Festivals were renamed or banned, rites repurposed or buried. Still, the divine spark flickered on, hidden in poetry, metaphor, and mystical visions. Saints spoke of union with God in terms too physical to be coincidence. Hildegard of Bingen described divine ecstasy with language that pulsed. Even cloistered mystics trembled at visions of love so fierce they scorched the veil between flesh and spirit. In Athens, where philosophy was currency and questions were rebellion, Socrates drank poison for the crime of asking too many. He had no sword, no scroll, just questions and the courage to ask them. Accused of corrupting youth and introducing foreign gods, he faced trial not with fear, but with irony. Offered the chance to flee, he stayed. Hemlock coursed through him slowly, silently. Even in death, he taught about principle, presence, and the price of truth. But Athens didn't silence him. They made him immortal, a man who proved that a body could die, but a voice, properly placed, could echo forever. And then there is Cleopatra, history's seductress, Egypt's queen, and a woman fluent in both perfume and poison. Beyond the silks and scrolls, she was a scientist, a strategist, a toxicologist who studied the art of death with the same precision others applied to love. In her private laboratory, she tested venoms and tinctures, seeking not cruelty, but control. In a world ruled by whispers and daggers, she chose certainty over spectacle. Death by blade was for the unprepared. Cleopatra preferred the subtlety of toxins, the silence of a drop that altered empires. Like Tantra's sacred embrace, her poison was ceremony, a final mastery over fate. Across these civilizations, from temple to forest, from laboratory to courtroom, one truth flows beneath it all. The body, the breath, the senses, the self, none of it was accidental. Where modern minds see indulgence, ancient hearts saw invitation. Sex, pleasure, pain, death, desire, these were not distractions from the sacred. They were the doorway. And while temples crumble and doctrines change, the human longing to merge the flesh with the infinite remains, unextinguished. Because what began in sacred groves and sanctified chambers did not vanish. It was rewritten, disguised, but not erased. It lives on in every ache for something more, in every gasp that feels like prayer, in every touch that opens a door to something wordless and eternal. The divine did not leave the body. It never had to. Close your eyes and step through the velvet shadows of history, where the true weapon of kings and queens was not a sword drawn in fury, but a whisper steeped in bitterness. In this world, death was not always loud. It came as a fragrance on silk, a sweetened cup, a pin dipped in venom. Here, poison was not chaos. It was control, wielded with elegance, precision, and terrifying intent. It begins, most famously, with a queen wrapped in myth. Cleopatra, the last sovereign of Egypt, not just a lover of emperors, but a student of science. In her palace, lined with scrolls and secrets, Cleopatra studied the chemistry of death, the way others studied beauty. She understood venom as both a scalpel and a statement. Some poisons imitated illness, others worked in moments or hours, depending on the desired effect. An accident, a confession, a warning. Her final act remains debated. The legendary asp hidden in a basket of figs, or perhaps a faster, cleaner poison woven into a comb or salve. The truth matters less than the message. Cleopatra refused to be paraded as Rome's trophy. Poison was not her defeat. It was her last decision, made in silence and silk. In Rome, poison wasn't desperation. It was an institution. Behind the marble pillars of the imperial court, power festered into paranoia, and ambition sharpened into a daggerless art. Emperors like Claudius and Nero relied not on armies, but on women like Locusta, the empire's most infamous poisoner. She was no mere servant, she was a chemist, an assassin in pearls, whose craft eliminated rivals with subtlety. Under her hand, mushrooms became death sentences. Feasts turned into funerals. Nero, enthralled by her efficacy, made her a teacher, training a generation in the art of vanishing enemies without scandal. In Rome, poison didn't scream. It whispered in wine and lingered in the bloodstream, untraceable and theatrical. In China, the court was a lacquered labyrinth where words were few, but poison spoke volumes. Across the Han, Tang, and Ming dynasties, concubines and empresses wielded toxins like courtly fans. They couldn't command armies, so they mastered apothecaries. Imperial physicians worked both sides, healers by day, assassins by appointment. A rival could be removed without a single shout, simply by a cup of chrysanthemum tea. Silver chopsticks tested food. Kitchens became laboratories. One empress, Lu Ji of the Han dynasty, poisoned and mutilated her enemies so thoroughly that even whispers feared her name. Death, in these courts, came quietly, dressed in etiquette and ceremony. Further west, in India, a tale emerged from the smoke of history and the pages of political strategy. The Vishakanyas, the poison maidens, were said to be trained from childhood, fed tiny doses of toxins until their very breath became lethal. Their beauty was their camouflage, their kiss a sentence. Whether literal or symbolic, these women represented a deeper fear, that intimacy itself could kill, that desire might be a trap disguised as pleasure. The Arthashastra, India's ancient manual on statecraft, recommended poison as a tool of espionage. Seduction and death were not opposites. They were allies. In these courts, perfume and peril walked hand in hand. Herod the Great ruled Judea with temples, towers, and fear. His reign, stained with executions and intrigue, used poison not just as tool, but theology. He feared betrayal so deeply that he murdered his own wife and sons. Historians whisper of secret doses masked as justice, a royal house eaten from within by invisible hands. When death came, Herod wanted to be mourned so desperately that he ordered the execution of innocent elders upon his demise, a command thankfully never fulfilled. Still, the message was clear. In Herod's court, poison wasn't just punishment, it was policy. Persia, with its golden halls and satrap-lined courts, knew the value of discretion. Kings like Darius and Xerxes ruled empires that stretched across continents, and within their palaces, poison became the final argument. Court figures like Bagoas, a eunuch and master manipulator, eliminated monarchs not with rebellion, but with rare tinctures. Persian alchemists understood poisons that mimicked illness, that struck hours later, that killed with plausible deniability. Even Alexander the Great's sudden death, shortly after feasting in Babylon, sparked rumors of Persian potions. In Persia, appearances ruled. Public executions stirred instability. Poison let the empire breathe, even as it bled. Even in biblical lands, poison cast a shadow. In the Book of Numbers, the ordeal of bitter water was a divine test of fidelity. A priest would mix temple dust into holy water, forcing a woman accused of adultery to drink. If guilty, her body would swell, and her womb wither. If innocent, she'd remain untouched, a primitive trial by toxin, a blend of superstition and sacrifice. Poison here wasn't hidden. It was ritual, seen as divine judgment. Across the ancient world, poison was more than substance. It was symbol. It represented the unseen forces of control, revenge, fear, and silence. It was wielded by those who couldn't fight openly: women, advisors, concubines, counselors. It was refined by those who knew that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits in the bottom of a cup. These empires, Rome, China, India, Egypt, Persia, built vast legacies in stone and blood. But beneath the triumphs and treaties, beneath the monuments and myths, another history simmered. One of quiet cups, trembling hands, and decisions made in shadows. A history not of armies, but of antidotes. Not of conquests, but of careful doses. And in that history, poison reigned. Not through violence, but through elegance. Not through might, but through mastery. A tool for queens, courtiers, and kings alike. Because in the end, death may come for all. But how it comes, and what message it carries, has always belonged to those bold enough to choose. Step carefully into the quiet spaces of ancient history, where the most devastating weapons made no sound. Imagine not the clang of swords or the roar of battle, but the soft clink of a cup, the faint scent of herbs, the shiver of trust turned cold. Poison wasn't chaos. It was choreography, precision without spectacle, death, delivered not by fury, but by decision. It thrived in moments others overlooked: a toast, a kiss, a shared meal. In the ancient world, poison was the weapon of those who ruled from behind curtains, who sought control without confrontation, and whose victories were measured not in monuments, but in empty seats at council tables. Its power lay not only in its lethality, but in its intimacy. It demanded proximity, a closeness that turned lovers into suspects and servants into executioners. In the grand architecture of antiquity courts and temples, poison crept like incense through every column and corridor, visible only in aftermath. Scripture, too, understood this quiet menace. Though the Bible lacks scenes of explicit assassination by poison, it is steeped in the metaphorical weight of toxins. In Deuteronomy, divine punishment is described through the imagery of bitterness and decay, gall and wormwood, herbs known for their toxic properties. These curses warned that disobedience would turn sustenance itself into sickness. In the poetry of Job, injustice is likened to poison, a corruption that invades the soul. The Psalms sharpen this metaphor. The wicked are said to carry poison under their tongues, their words as lethal as venom, a symbol of deceit wrapped in piety. Even in the Gospels, where grand acts of divine healing and betrayal dominate, the shadow of poison lingers. Herod, a figure entangled in both Roman and Jewish power, carries a legacy steeped in paranoia and rumor, his name echoing with whispered executions and silent eliminations. While the Bible presents poison more as allegory than action, it reflects a world deeply aware of its presence. The Hebrews, surrounded by empires where toxins were tools of diplomacy and vengeance, absorbed that awareness into their theology. Poison became not just a method of death, but a metaphor for spiritual corruption, a quiet rot that begins with trust and ends with ruin. Beyond Scripture, poison was universal. From Egypt to Athens, from Persia to India, it required no battlefield, no loyal army, no public cause. It was the weapon of the private war, the war waged in bedrooms, banquets, and bloodlines. Where swords called attention, poison left only questions. It carried no honor, only effectiveness. To die by poison meant you were not an enemy on the field, but a threat in the palace. It meant betrayal. Someone you knew had chosen silence over confrontation. And that betrayal lasted longer than death. It eroded not just the body, but the legacy, left behind suspicion that lingered in rooms long after the poison had done its work. The ancients respected its elegance. Philosophers saw in poison a symbol of destiny, of punishment that came not with thunder, but with stillness. Religions framed it as divine consequence, a judgment rendered in bitterness. Rulers used it to reshape their courts while maintaining an illusion of stability. What makes poison so enduring is its contradiction. It is both cowardly and cunning, both invisible and unforgettable. It kills not only the flesh, but the illusion of loyalty. And while it silences the victim, it makes the echoes louder. Socrates' hemlock, Cleopatra's asp, Claudius' figs, the Vishakanas of India, these stories endure because they speak to the same ancient truth. In power's deepest chambers, the most dangerous figure is the one who never draws a blade. Poison has no face, yet it rewrote succession lines, ended empires, and shaped theology. It did not roar, but it ruled. And in the silent theater of history, it remains the perfect assassin. 9. Locks of Time, a sacred history of security. Close your eyes, if only for a moment, and let the noise of the present dissolve. Let your breath slow, as though stepping through a narrow stone doorway that hasn't opened in centuries. Feel your fingertips graze carved walls, scent the dry dust of forgotten tombs, and listen, not with ears, but with memory. Before passwords and pins, before vaults and biometrics, there were locks born not of metal, but of meaning. Security, in its earliest form, was never just about protecting possessions. It was about protecting order, identity, eternity itself. In ancient Egypt, a civilization devoted to divine symmetry and ritual precision, the concept of locking something away was nearly sacred. Along the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, where papyrus rustled in temple libraries and granaries brimmed with the wealth of harvests, the first mechanical lock was born, not in iron, but in wood and thought. Around 2000 BCE, Egyptian engineers crafted what would become the ancestor of the modern lock, the wooden pin tumbler. It was deceptively simple yet profoundly clever, a horizontal bolt that could slide into a carved frame to seal a chamber, pierced with a series of holes that awaited vertical wooden pins. When the bolt was moved into place, those pins would drop down into the holes, locking it tightly. But where there is a lock, there must be a key, and here, the Egyptians invented one, shaped not unlike a wooden toothbrush, with carefully placed pegs. This key, inserted from above, would lift each pin simultaneously, releasing the bolt with a silent grace. It was not brute force, but design, a dialogue between gravity, shape, and purpose. These locks guarded more than homes. They protected tombs, sealed temple chambers, and closed the doors behind royal eternity. In a land obsessed with the battle between Ma'at, order, and Isfet, chaos, the lock became a symbol of structure and intentional access. To turn a key in ancient Egypt was to declare purpose and legitimacy, to participate in the sacred rhythm of controlled entrance and reverent silence. Though time decayed the wooden skeletons of these early mechanisms, the idea they carried endured. So enduring, in fact, that modern metal locks still mimic the same basic principle. The pins drop. The key lifts. The bolt slides. Thousands of years, and the dance remains the same. But while Egypt sculpted the first mechanical locks from cedar and imagination, in the wide, bustling cities of ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, Nineveh, security took on a different form, more symbolic, yet equally profound. Here, the concept of sealing, rather than locking, took root. Instead of preventing access by physical means, the people of Mesopotamia developed a way to track, authenticate, and sanctify the act of closing something. Their invention was the cylinder seal, a small, intricately carved stone cylinder, worn like a pendant or ring, unique to its owner, and pressed into wet clay to leave behind an identifying impression. Think of it as an ancient fingerprint, a signature etched in relief. These seals depicted scenes from mythology, animals, gods, and often included cuneiform inscriptions that added legal or divine authority. When rolled across soft clay, the image would stretch like a scroll, sealing the closure of a door, a chest, a jar, a sacred box. If the seal was broken, it meant someone had entered, someone unauthorized. But even more powerfully, the seal itself proved ownership, authority, and permission. You didn't just need the means to open something, you needed the right. In this way, security was less about preventing intrusion and more about defining legitimacy. A seal said, "This is mine. I have touched this. My identity protects this space." Cylinder seals became the currency of power, used by kings, priests, scribes, and merchants. Their loss was catastrophic, not just a physical inconvenience, but a spiritual and political crisis. The seal, in essence, was both lock and key. In our modern world of digital IDs and biometric scanners, the concept may seem distant, yet its roots remain eerily familiar. The two-factor authentication of today, a password paired with a physical token, is an echo of the Mesopotamian truth, that the act of access must be proven twice, by what you know and by what you possess. From the fertile plains of the Tigris and the sacred stillness of the Nile, the idea of controlled access migrated into the hands of Greek artisans, thinkers who saw in every bolt and lever a new way to master both matter and mind. In the growing city-states of ancient Greece, where privacy and personal property became more defined, locks began to shift from sacred ritual to practical security, and the role of the locksmith emerged. The Greeks, limited by resources but rich in curiosity, refined the pin-locking idea with sturdier materials, introducing bronze, iron, and metal pegs to strengthen their mechanisms. The design evolved from the horizontal bolt of Egypt into more compact devices, sometimes concealed within door frames or furniture. One common design was the bar or bolt lock, where a sliding piece fit into a groove and was pinned in place with a peg that could only be removed with a special key. It wasn't complex by modern standards, but it marked a turning point. Security became craft. This ushered in a new respect for those who could build and manipulate such systems. The locksmith was no longer just a builder. He was a gatekeeper, a problem solver, an engineer of privacy. And in this subtle shift from religious chamber to personal threshold, the act of securing space began to democratize. No longer reserved only for kings and gods, the locked door began to protect merchants, scholars, and households. And just like that, the lock transformed from a sacred barrier to a personal boundary. Still significant, still symbolic, but more intimate, more human. Through these inventions and ideologies, the ancients whispered their values through design. They told us that access must be earned, that identity and intention matter, and that control whether through carved wood, etched stone, or forged bronze, is not merely a technical feat but a philosophical one. To lock a door is to draw a line in time, to say, "This is mine, this is sacred, and you must ask before entering." And though we live in a digital age where our locks are smart and our keys invisible, we are still speaking their language. Every code, every scan, every secured vault is an echo of that first wooden bolt sliding silently into place on a Nile doorway, touched only by the right hands. Step beyond the gates of time and walk into the breath of ancient cities, where metal met myth and silence could mean safety. In a world before surveillance and sirens, protection was a matter of wisdom shaped in bronze, in secrets carved into wood, and in mechanisms so silent they felt like spells. To lock something was not merely to secure it, but to declare a boundary between the sacred and the profane, the permitted and the forbidden. In ancient Greece, where the mind ruled the city as much as the sword, locks carried more than mechanical function. They bore philosophical weight. Greek locks evolved from Egyptian principles, but introduced refinement and symbolism. These were not pocket-sized trinkets, but long, often L-shaped rods of bronze or iron, some as long as a forearm. Inserted into vertical keyholes, these keys would be maneuvered to lift pins or shift internal pegs, freeing the bolt in an elegant motion that required understanding as much as effort. To carry such a key meant you held authority. It wasn't only about opening a door. It was about declaring ownership, stewardship, identity. Temples guarded sacred offerings behind locked chambers, while scholars secured their scrolls and priests protected relics. The common citizen might make do with wooden latches, but in aristocratic circles, a lock was a mark of status, intellect, and trust. Athens turned security into silent language. In a city obsessed with discourse and democracy, privacy was its own form of power. And so, the locksmith emerged not just as a tradesman, but as a technician of trust, crafting mechanisms that served both secrecy and autonomy. When the Romans came, they did what Romans always did. They codified, miniaturized, and spread it across the known world. Locks in the Roman Empire became ubiquitous, found in homes, temples, markets, and even on the wrists of slaves. Roman ingenuity birthed the warded lock, a device that used fixed obstacles within the lock mechanism, called wards. Only keys with precise notches could bypass these and rotate the bolt. This inspired the skeleton key, a minimal design that could slip past simpler wards, a trick embraced by locksmiths and thieves alike. But the true marvels were Roman puzzle locks, intricate devices built into chests or boxes that required not just a key, but a sequence of movements or pressure on hidden mechanisms. Some even had false keyholes to mislead intruders. Roman keys, often delicately crafted, doubled as jewelry, worn as rings to signify not just function, but pride. If you had a key on your finger, you had something worth protecting. Locks on slave collars, though chilling, reveal how far the concept of ownership extended. Security was always about treasure, but control. Across the Roman world, locking became deeply personal. No two keys were alike. No two locks were random. Security had become an intimate craft, and with it, the culture of privacy was born. Meanwhile, in the East, a parallel evolution was unfolding with its own quiet grace. In ancient China, lockmaking was an art form shaped by balance, symbolism, and philosophical precision. As early as the Zhou dynasty, Chinese artisans were producing all-metal locks, compact and beautifully engineered. These locks, known as suo, were often barrel or box-shaped and employed internal tumblers or spring-loaded pins. The flat key, inserted from one end, aligned these elements so the bolt could slide free. Their design bore eerie resemblance to the Egyptian pin tumbler mechanism, proof that brilliant ideas often rise independently in the human mind. But China added its own signature: elegance. Locks were shaped like dragons, tigers, or turtles, embodying spiritual guardianship as much as mechanical function. A lock wasn't just a barrier, it was a charm, a prayer in bronze. Early trick locks appeared as well, requiring multiple steps or angles to open, demanding intellect alongside possession. These guarded scholar chests, sacred texts, ancestral relics, their secrecy wrapped in both engineering and myth. To unlock such an object was to earn its contents. Locksmithing became a revered trade, with knowledge passed through generations or carefully guarded in workshop lineage. These designs influenced distant lands via the Silk Road, whispering their logic into Persian and Islamic lock culture. Further south in ancient India, where philosophy and craftsmanship danced together beneath lotus domes and temple spires, security was often infused with ritual and hidden intention. Locks were metal, compact, and subtly clever, used to safeguard treasure rooms, scroll cabinets, and sacred spaces. The Maurya period gave rise to elaborate mechanisms, sometimes camouflaged behind carved panels, false drawers, or hidden chambers. Push a carved petal, twist a lotus stem, and a compartment might spring open. These devices blurred the line between architecture and mechanism. Sanskrit texts like the Arthashastra described not only political espionage and warcraft, but the art of concealment, secret rooms, disguised locks, and dual-access pathways. Protection wasn't always brute resistance. Often it was redirection and illusion. Many lock designs bore spiritual motifs, serpents, mandalas, symbols of rebirth or protection. To lock a temple gate was both a ritual and a boundary, opened only on sacred days. Security here was cyclical, symbolic, aligned with cosmic rhythms. In India, to protect something meant to hide its meaning, not just its form. And farther north, among the wind-swept highlands and shadowed fjords of northern Europe, a different kind of lock took root. The Celts, practical yet precise, relied on heavy wooden doors, metal bars, and crude but effective iron padlocks. Their technology was straightforward, yet their craftsmanship revealed an understanding of permanence and defense. Archaeological finds from Iron Age settlements show iron keys, often simple but made with care, revealing that even among warrior societies there was value in quiet protection. Locks here weren't just about wealth. They marked territory, legacy, and generational trust. The act of closing a door and locking it with iron meant something primal. This is my place, this is my people, and you may not enter. Across these cultures, Greek, Roman, Chinese, Indian, Celtic, one idea endures: that to protect something is to declare it worthy. That security, when crafted with purpose, becomes more than defense. It becomes expression. Whether in the form of a dragon-shaped padlock, a ring-shaped key, or a mechanism hidden behind a carved panel, the ancients knew what we sometimes forget: that the act of guarding something often reveals its deepest value. Locks were not just objects. They were ideologies. They spoke of identity, secrecy, intention, and inheritance. They marked the line between chaos and order, and their legacy still lingers every time a key turns in a lock and something once hidden is revealed. Step quietly through the threshold of history, where a whisper of iron, wood, and human intent murmurs through every locked door. Before alarms and surveillance, before passwords and biometric scans, there was the hand-forged promise of protection: the lock. But this was no mere tool. It was a symbol, an artifact of belief as much as of engineering. From the wind-swept fjords of the north to the polished domes of Byzantium, the lock evolved not in silence, but in song, shaped by culture, spirituality, and necessity. Begin in the chill mists of northern Europe, where the Celts built not just homes, but thresholds of meaning. Early locks were simple: iron latches and sliding bolts, often traded or looted from Roman influence. Yet the true guardians of Celtic spaces were charms and carvings, etched spirals and sacred knots meant to repel spirits as much as thieves. In these realms, a lock was more than deterrent. It was declaration. Among the Norse, this philosophy deepened. On Viking ships and in household chests, padlocks of iron clinked with purpose. Keys, some shaped like serpents or miniature Mjolnirs, hung from belts and grave goods. They were both guardians and badges. To a Viking woman, the keeper of the house, keys were sovereignty, worn not as weight but as woven identity. Even the gods, it was believed, sealed fate with runes and spells, proving that to unlock was divine, and to bind was sacred. In the East, the Byzantine Empire picked up the Roman flame and made it dance. Locks became ornate, layered in artistry and ingenuity. Bronze padlocks shaped like crosses, lions, or geometric puzzles offered not just security, but theater. Some tricked with false keyholes or sprung bolts. Others protected sacred relics behind layers of ceremony and brass. In this world, a key did not just fit a lock, it answered a riddle. Byzantium passed its knowledge eastward, and under the Abbasid Caliphate, that spark ignited into golden brilliance. Islamic artisans brought mathematical elegance to security. Padlocks of brass and copper gleamed with Arabic calligraphy, prayers etched into the very surface of protection. Inside, layers of tumblers and levers turned each key into a carefully calibrated invitation. Inventors like Al-Jazari documented mechanical wonders, not just locks, but complex automata and fluid systems, proof that to guard something well was to understand both nature and God. In the markets of Baghdad and the mosques of Samarra, locks were more than metal. They were faith-made function, order rendered in gear and groove. Farther south, the Indian subcontinent hummed with its own codes of concealment and craft. In temples where gods slumbered in stone sanctuaries, locks guarded more than treasure. They safeguarded the rhythm of ritual. Ancient Indian locks blended metallurgy with metaphor, lotus motifs, serpent coils, and sacred geometries hid the mechanisms from untrained eyes. Hidden compartments, false drawers, and pressure-triggered levers created not just security, but stories, puzzles that required not brute strength, but insight. Some temples unlocked only on astrologically ordained days, reminding all that access to the sacred was not merely about possession, but permission. And from the scrolls of the Arthashastra to the secret corridors of Mauryan palaces, India's legacy of hidden safes and sacred locks endures, not only in history, but in philosophy. Locks were not always just locks. They were statements of trust, belief, hierarchy, and exclusion. As technology advanced, so too did the need to protect it. In every culture, security provoked invention, and invention begot imitation. As locks became more elaborate, so did those who would undo them. The lockpick, the thief, the infiltrator. They were born alongside the very mechanisms meant to keep them out. From the Mesopotamian seals to the Roman skeleton keys, from trick locks in Chinese cabinets to the whispering bolts in medieval monasteries, security was always a dance between concealment and revelation. And in that dance lies a deeper truth. Locks, ancient and intricate, were never only about keeping things in or out. They were declarations of identity, tools of psychological theater, and devices through which power was marked, measured, and maintained. They guarded not only objects, but memory, meaning, and myth. So the next time a key turns softly in your hand, remember, you are part of an unbroken lineage of those who chose to close a door, not out of fear, but to say in quiet certainty that what lies beyond is worth protecting.